Hello and welcome to Truth Sentinel, watching over the truth in the news. Today we're going to be talking about ISIS, the war in Syria and the refugee crisis. I've thought of a new way to fund this show. Apparently you can just walk into an oil refinery and just start selling the oil. ISIS are doing it, so I thought I'd do it myself. I'll just fill up the barrels and sell them at the market. ISIS also make money from crops, selling human organs, human trafficking, drugs, ransacking banks and selling antiquities. Not bad skills for a group that have only been around for a year. It's almost like they're getting help from somewhere. Other people that need to make some money are the military-industrial complex. Now the Iraq war's over, they need to make money from the sale of arms and from war, basically. They need to keep their troops busy. So are they trying to lead us into World War III? I think there's a good chance they are. Everything's set up in Syria at the moment for World War III. It's a real possibility. So I would say it's not the refugees that are the problem, it's our world leaders. We're going to be talking about some of these issues in today's episode. Later on we'll have a guest, Gabriela Andreevska, who's working at a refugee camp, and we'll tell you more about her later. So settle back, relax, and enjoy episode 53 of Truth Sentinel. So first, let's go to Anthony Kay, our academic researcher who works for a publishing house in Kazakhstan at the foot of the Himalayas and 1,500 meters above sea level, near the highest ice rink in the world. Anthony, how's things?
Things are great, Scott. I'm still here in the stands, as you know, and enjoying life here, exploring Almaty a little bit more. As you know, I've lived here before, but I'm living in another part of the city now, so got a whole new neighbourhood to enjoy. Yeah, it's been good. How are things with you?
Things are fine. I'm over in Thailand now, and I've been doing a bit of Thai boxing, trying to get fit, and sometimes lying on the beach and doing a bit of work here and there as well. So yeah, I'm really enjoying drinking coconut water every day and eating Thai food.
Oh dear, sounds like you're living the dream.
Yeah, it could be worse, let's put it that way. So Anthony, I'm a bit worried about using the internet. Apparently you can be radicalized on the internet. I keep seeing it on the news and on TV programs that you can just be talking to someone on the internet and get radicalized. Have you come across that at all?
Oh, look, it happens to me all the time. Yeah, I mean, I usually have to go and take a shower off the radicalism. Yeah.
Okay, I'll try that.
And I heard your interview with Gabriella. It's great. She talked quite extensively about the plight of some of the refugees that have come across to Europe from Syria and from other places as well.
Yeah, that's Gabriela Andreevska, who we'll be listening to later, who works on Gevgelija refugee camp near the Macedonian border.
Yeah, and I mean, I've sort of come across a number of people who are far more kind of directly, personally involved in this situation than I am myself, you know, especially when I was living and working in Turkey. And they all have quite incredible stories to tell, you know, some stories that really are heartbreaking and some stories of hope. I think to fully empathize with what's happening to these refugees, it is useful to know some background about their situation, because you don't often hear about that stuff in the mainstream Western press. And I think it's quite difficult to really put yourself in their boots and picture yourself having to make the decisions that these people have to make.
Absolutely. I mean, when you hear the stories of them coming across on those boats and, you know, I mean, there was that recent picture of the child face down in the sand. I mean, but this has been happening for a lot longer period than has sort of been shown in the media. It's been happening for quite a while now, hasn't it?
It has, yeah. And you've had sort of countries like Turkey and Jordan and Lebanon kind of buffering the Eurozone from the problem, which has allowed the media to kind of ignore it or just, you know, reduce it to a bunch of stereotypes. But I wanted to focus today on the Syrian war because I think it is truly one of the great messes of the last half century, and I think that pretty much any sane person would flee if something like this started happening in their country. So look, the first thing to say is that, when you hear the phrase civil war, it does kind of sound relatively ordered, like two sides on a battlefield with generals and, each one's in control of different areas of the country and so on. But as we know, that's not what the Syrian Civil War is like at all. There's lots of different sides. They're fighting it out in urban centers, in neighborhoods where people live. And I don't want to go into the causes too deeply because we'll be here all night, but in early 2011, you had the Arab Spring, and as a kind of outgrowth of that, there were peaceful protests against the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. But unfortunately, the response of his regime was to start shooting the protesters. Yeah. And they didn't just do that a couple of times. They kept on doing it, and they gave no indication that they might stop at any point. So after a few months of that, some of the protesters started putting up armed resistance. And then some factions within the army defected and joined them because they were just so fed up with the way Assad was ruling the country. And so those elements together became known as the Free Syrian Army. And when the civil war started, those were the two kind of original sides, the Free Syrian Army and the army of the regime. But actually, the Free Syrian Army was never really a kind of unified force. A lot of these things, in a lot of cases, it was just a portion of the local military who were annoyed, and a lot of the time the things that they did were organized locally. So you might have an army commander in another province who has no idea what's going on in the province next door. And altogether there were about 30 of these separate groups. They all carried this name, but they were running independent kind of military and guerrilla operations. So right there you already had kind of a mess. But the other thing that happened in 2011 was this idea of rebelling against Assad immediately appealed to some Islamic extremists, and so they came and joined the Free Syrian Army. That gave Assad a very clever idea, which was that he could try to demonize these rebel forces, call them jihadists or whatever. So he had some jihadists in prison inside Syria, and he released all of them. And of course, many of those went and joined the movement against him. So that just made for more chaos. It also meant that there would be breakaway groups and splinter factions within the rebel forces, because you had guys joining up from, all kinds of ideological backgrounds, some of them religious and secular moderates, others who wanted to set up a full-blown theocracy after Assad was gone. So, you can imagine if the Free Syrian Army somehow wins this conflict, then they'll have to sort all of that out, which in itself seems like it would be virtually impossible. But that was just the first year. At the beginning of 2012, you got a new group called the Al-Nusra Front. Now, they're alleged to be the Syrian arm of al-Qaeda, though I'm not really sure if that's true. It may just be one of those things that, Western journalists like to say, because al-Qaeda is lazy journalistic shorthand for, scary, So I'm not too sure if that's really true, but in any case, around the time they started fighting, Kurds also joined the fray. There's a concentration of Kurdish people in the northeast of Syria, near the Iraqi border, and they then effectively seceded from the government. They tried to make several northeastern regions of Syria independent. So already at that point you had four main groups, and each of them started attracting some backing from abroad. So from 2012 onwards, it started to become a proxy war. You had the Iranian government supporting Assad, sending him supplies and military officers. You had several of the Gulf states sending money and weapons to the rebels, and that was mostly because they're really not friends with Iran, and they didn't like the Iranian influence in the region. So then your proxy war was really on, Then in mid-2012, this just blows my mind, Hezbollah sent an army from Lebanon to essentially invade the rebel-held areas of the country so they could support Iran supporting Assad. And then in response to that, the Gulf states stepped up their aid and started sending more arms and money. And this was especially the Saudis and the Qataris, so the Wahhabist areas of the Islamic world. And all of that happened before any Western powers got involved. So So by the time you had, Obama kind of blundering in, it was already this hopelessly tangled mess. So even if a US administration had genuinely wanted to, find the good guys and support them, there was pretty much no way to do that.
But they did support them, didn't they? But they didn't really support the good guys because there weren't really any good guys.
Exactly. Yeah. Obama signed a secret order somewhere in the middle of 2013, and he sent the CIA into Syria to train and equip the rebels. And then it was discovered that Assad had apparently used chemical weapons on civilians, and so Obama got the excuse.
Yeah, but that's disputed, isn't it?
Well, it is, yeah, but it gave Obama the excuse he needed to go in kind of more officially and make an even bigger mess. And then next you got the Russians. They started putting pressure on Assad. They were saying, like, surrender your chemical weapons to the international community so as to avoid US intervention. So the Kremlin was basically saying, look, keep the Americans out of our sphere of influence, even if it means giving up a tactical advantage. So then the next big development was in February 2014, when you had this faction within the rebel forces breaking away and forming a new group, which they called the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. And I think most of our listeners will know this group quite well by now.
They'll either know them by the name IS, ISIL, ISIS, or now Daesh. I mean, you can take your pick, really, can't you?
Yeah, Daesh was started to be used by the Australian ex-Prime Minister Tony Abbott because he found out that it was a kind of derogatory term for them. So they actually got most of their original ranks from parts of the rebel forces who were supposedly allied with Al-Qaeda. But the relationship between those two groups kind of hit some trouble pretty much immediately. And then they started fighting each other as well. But the thing with ISIS was they weren't interested in fighting Assad. They only fought the other rebels in the east of Syria near Iraq, especially the Kurds on the borders. And they were really successful, and that allowed them to set up a little mini-state that was kind of half in Syria and half in Iraq, this so-called caliphate that they talk about. And then they started moving east and grabbing some pretty big slices of Iraq, so you got a kind of geographical broadening of the conflict.
And didn't they also take millions of dollars worth of equipment from Iraq as well that the American military had left behind?
This I'm not sure about. I have read some things to that effect, but I don't know. I think you'd probably better ask somebody who's studied that aspect of the conflict more than I have.
I read it in an article, Anthony. It must be true.
Must be. But the US response to that was for the Pentagon to send more training units into Syria to train the rebels who were fighting ISIS, whereas before they had been training rebels who were fighting Assad. So in some cases, it seems like the Pentagon were actually training rebels to fight people who the CIA had previously trained just a few months earlier. And if that's not a great illustration of how ill-equipped the West is to deal with conflicts in the Middle East, then I just don't know what is. I mean, it just became crazy. Then Turkey decided to step in. So they started bombing the Kurds in the northeast, and they started bombing Kurds inside Iraq, even though those Kurds were fighting Assad. And according to the Turkish President Erdogan, Assad is the world's most evil man. And even though the Kurds were fighting ISIS. Now, I would quite like to go into Turkey's role in this more deeply, because I think it's quite complex, And they have actually, on the other side of the coin, they've set up some of the world's best refugee camps to cope with the exodus from Syria. So we can't say that they're, purely a bad actor, but I think their role is very dangerous.
We had the recent shooting down of the Russian jet.
Yeah, and I don't think that's over by any stretch of the imagination. I'm sure you remember a year ago, everybody was kind of concerned about the Ukrainian conflict and how it could set off World War III.
Now it actually doesn't look so bad, does it?
Well, I mean, it looks awful, but in terms of a candidate for World War III, I think Syria is much more likely. And look, if there's one nation that's going to send it all over the edge, I'd probably put my money on the Turks, because the others are at least rational actors. You know, they're kind of they're approaching it, you know, in a way that looks after their interests, whereas the Turks are approaching this as with this kind of fallen empire mentality that is very strong in the nation at the moment. You know, they had this Ottoman Empire that fell 100 years ago, but in the last 15 years they've had quite a bit of economic success, and the nation is starting to see itself as kind of being in the process of rebuilding the empire, starting with dominating their neighbours. And with somebody as crazy as Erdogan in charge, they can't be relied upon to be a rational actor. So
well, I mean,
I'm particularly
shooting down that Russian jet was crazy. They didn't need to do that at all. I mean,
yeah, that's right.
It's disputed as to whether it actually did venture into Turkish territory, and even if it did, it was a matter of seconds. So it definitely didn't need to be shot down. So it just seems rather erratic.
Yeah, no, there was no justification for that at all. Even if you accept the Turkish figures for how far it was inside the zone and how long it spent there, it's still ridiculous. But look, that's probably for another episode, because I think here we want to focus on the kind of human aspect as much as we can. So I was just trying to make the point with all of that you already had this kind of god-awful mess in Syria, and you know, you had the pernicious influence of Saudi Arabia behind the scenes, plus you had Iran in there backing this tyrant, plus the US had barged in and was pushing its own agenda. And then suddenly you've got this, you know, very large and well-armed country right next door in Turkey with this despot in charge, trying to manipulate the whole thing for his political gain. So look, it had just turned into a nightmare, and it still is. But the one thing that had been happening in all of that was Assad had been losing territory the whole time. His territorial base was getting smaller, and so was his base of political support. So look, by the second half of this year, it seemed as though his regime might just fold at some point. But then, as you know, yet another very unhelpful person decided to step in. And of course, that was President Putin, when he announced that Russia was going to use military force to save Assad's government. Now, I think it's worth mentioning here that Putin's announcement actually sent profound shockwaves through Russia, because there's a whole generation there who remembers the defeat in Afghanistan. You could almost say it's kind of a stain on the nation's soul, almost like, you know, Russia's Vietnam, so to speak. So when we hear about Russia supporting Assad, we have to bear that in mind. The same as when we hear about Iran supporting Assad. It's not that there's wide support in those countries. It's just they're both places where the leadership can essentially do what it wants, you know, even if it means like needlessly throwing away thousands of its own citizens' lives. But anyway, with that caveat, officially the Russian military were going in to bomb ISIS, but so far they've only bombed rebels who are fighting Assad, including some groups backed by the US. So now you've got 4 big powers and 2 small but very rich ones, the Saudis and the Qataris, all trying to get their way in Syria and periodically stepping on each other's toes.
What could possibly go wrong?
What could possibly go wrong? So I went into all that detail because I think when we talk about Syrian refugees, this is the picture we ought to have in our minds. I mean, try to picture all of that stuff happening in a country that's roughly half the size of Italy, and picture yourself trying to live in that country with people, you know, running around and shooting at each other in your neighborhood, with schools and hospitals and residential blocks constantly being blown up, with airstrikes from Russia, airstrikes from the US. Imagine like walking your kids to school through almost a kind of post-apocalyptic landscape and not knowing if they'll be alive when you come to pick them up at the end of the day.
I saw a video on the internet today inside a Syrian classroom, and they were just teaching, and then these bombs went off fairly close and everyone just ran out. So yeah, it's just crazy. I mean, you can actually see that. You can watch it for yourself on just if you look at some of these videos. Yeah,
it is. I mean, the country, or large sections of the country now, have turned into an absolute hell on earth. And look, imagine, as has happened to, you know, many thousands of people, imagine eventually your building is taken down. You've got family members inside, you can't get them out, you have to go in and drag the bodies out, And in some areas, you can't even do that because you've got to go into hiding so that, you're not going to be beheaded by jihadists because you're not Islamic enough, Now, and once you've got that picture firmly in your head, I think the next step is to go back and juxtapose it with what we hear in the British media or from the right-wing European parties, Listen to what they say about Syrian refugees alongside that picture and see how you react. Or watch that horrible piece of footage. Did you see the footage of the Hungarian camera woman tripping over the refugee?
Yeah, I did, yeah.
Yeah, well, he was like running away from Hungary with a kid in his arms. So watch that next to the picture I've just painted for you and then see how you feel. Because however you feel at that point, that's your stance on refugees. If you feel comfortable with it, then fine. But if you're not, if you don't feel comfortable with it, then your stance is not the one which the mass media wants you to have. You've essentially become one of those people whose views on things departs from, what the powers that be are putting forward in their political rhetoric and their media coverage about this. So I just want to say, basically, if you can empathize with with how desperate things have become in Syria and understand why these people are coming, then congratulations, welcome to the club. You might be surprised to find that it's a huge club. There are millions of us, but we're quite hard to see because the media is determined to keep us off the radar and only show the people who are upset and threatened and who don't want this to happen.
I think there's a misconception, really, that these refugees are, potentially terrorists. And we talk about that a bit. I talk about that a bit with Gabriella. But yeah, I mean, it is kind of obvious if you think about it. Terrorists don't need to go in boats where there's a possibility they're going to die to take part in their terrorist acts. They don't need to do that. They've got much better ways of moving across borders. So, it seems like they can move quite freely actually with the Paris attacks. How that guy who was in the ISIS magazine was able to walk into Paris and then take part in that attack. I don't know. I it makes you a bit suspicious about what's going on a bit.
Yeah. Look, I agree, and I mean, speaking of media and political deception, I mean, there is an example right there. I mean, this idea of IS militants infiltrating refugee boats and sneaking into Europe, that's an idea that UKIP have taken up in the UK, for example, and it's also been mentioned by politicians in other European countries and the media outlets that serve them.
Did you hear Donald Trump's latest announcement?
I didn't, sadly.
It's all over the news, basically. He's now said ban all Muslims from going to America.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I don't really know what to say in response to that, Scott, apart from he's running for president.
I think he's just... I don't think he can be seriously running for president. You can't say something like that. And he's getting lots of media coverage for it, but I just don't think you can say something like that and ever expect to be president.
Well, we'll see. Who knows? George Bush got over the line with a little help from the Supreme Court. But yeah, look, I just want to make the point before we finish up. This idea of ISIS and the boats. It could happen. It's definitely possible, in the hypothetical sense that it could happen. But you've got border officials in European countries constantly watching out for this, and right now they're saying unequivocally that it isn't happening. In Italy, for instance, there hasn't been a single case of a known terrorist arriving on a migrant boat in the last 2 years. Not one case. The Italians have a cross-chamber parliamentary committee on immigration and security. That committee oversees refugee arrivals, and its deputy chairman was interviewed recently. He told the media that the number of suspected terrorist cases in processing centres is 0. And he also said, as Gabriella is going to say later, that figure of 0 makes total sense because, in fact, it costs a lot to train a terrorist. To carry out a major action, you've got to train them in recruitment, infiltration, technical aspects of the attack. You've got to organise false papers for them, send them abroad, house them there, supply them with logistical support and equipment. It costs a fortune. So, as a terror group, if you invest that much time and money in a particular individual, you're not going to put them on a Libyan death boat because people drown on those boats. So you're just not going to do that. So you put them on an airplane. That's the only sensible way to do it. And look, at one level higher, at EU Parliament level, the same thing. They've got a body called the Subcommittee on Security and Defence, and they say the same thing. They haven't seen a single case. So we can pretty much rule that out, regardless of what they're saying in the mainstream media. It's just not happening.
Yeah, I think the refugee crisis and the terrorism situation are two different things. I mean, people are right to be concerned. You don't want anyone just moving across borders, but as it happens, it seems that they are doing that. So I'd question how they're able to do that. How is a guy that's featured in the ISIS magazine able to get into Paris? It does make me suspicious, but it does seem to me that the refugees are nothing to do with this. I mean, sure, be careful, but it's obviously not happening on a large scale, so people don't need to associate the two.
Yeah, and look, if you look at the processing system in refugee processing centres, it's far more thorough than the system that you go through when you arrive at an airport in the EU. I mean, you and I have both arrived at many airports inside the EU. You know what it's like. That's absolute cake compared to what you have to go through in a processing centre to prove who you are. So again, if you're a terrorist or an IS militant and you want to minimise your risk of detection, just go by plane. It's simple as that.
Yeah. Anyway, should we go and see what Gabriella has to say?
That would be great. I'm looking forward to hearing her again.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for joining us, Anthony. We'll go and speak to Gabriella now. Just a quick advert break. Our email is scottsentinel9@gmail.com. Check out our past episodes. We've got lots of interesting guests, and you can find us on YouTube on 2 channels. We talk about conspiracies, mysteries, injustices, corruption, religion, war, peace. You can leave your own message and we can base our show around what you think. That's what we intend to do. Help us find the truth in the news. Find our YouTube channels. We've got all the episodes on there. Truth Sentinel and Truth Sentinel 1. Subscribe to both so you get notified of everything. Click on the About section, you'll find all the links. Have you got something you'd like to advertise? If it's truth related, honest and ethical, get in contact. You can help us, we can help you. We sell our own t-shirts with the greatest enemy of truth is blind belief in authority on the back. Just $20 plus postage and packing. Let us know your size, just send us an email, we can sort it out. We've also teamed up with trutht-shirts.com and they make political t-shirts. Let people know where you stand basically. Use the code TRUTH1, you get a 10% discount and we get a donation. They make all kinds of political t-shirts and they can customize them for you as well. If you've got any ideas for publicity stunts, get in contact. We need to escalate this channel, make it much bigger. We need your help. Please support us. Thank you. Type in the name Gabriela Andreevska on YouTube, Facebook or Google and you'll see a young woman who is an activist, selflessly helping people fleeing war-torn or poverty-stricken countries seeking a better life and passing through Macedonia near the border with Greece at Gevgelija refugee camp. She's kindly agreed to join us today to give us an update on what's happening there. So Gabriella, welcome to Truth Sentinel.
Thank you for inviting me. Nice to be here with you.
You're very welcome. I believe the border was closed for a few days recently due to protests. Is everything okay now? Is it open again now?
Well, it wasn't closed for a few days. First of all, it was closed for a day, but it was not closed at all of the time. It was like an emotional roller coaster for both us, the volunteers, and especially for the refugees, because it was open and closed, open, closed, open, closed. So it was like an open-closed policy that politicians play. But this time it was not just politicians. It was also the refugees that blocked it at a certain point for a few hours, because there's this nationality-based segregation happening at, well, not just at the Greek-Macedonian border, but in all of the Balkan states. So only certain nationalities are allowed to cross those nationalities being Syrians, Afghans, and Iraqis, and everyone else coming from a different country is not allowed to cross and continue onwards. So the Moroccans and Iranians were particularly upset because of this, because they were not allowed to cross, and further tension and discord was created among the different refugee groups. So the Moroccans and Iranians decided to block the border and protest. Now at present it's open. Things have stabilized a little bit, but it's still only Syrians, Iraqis, and Afghans that are allowed to cross. The other ones are still waiting. Some of them have started to go back towards Athens or Thessaloniki, where they will be put in camps. But it's still unclear what will happen to these so-called unprivileged nationalities, which are, in my view, unjustly labeled as economic migrants.
Yeah, it must be very difficult for them not knowing what's going to happen to them.
Yeah, some of them have even been inquiring about possibilities to go back to their own countries, because they've been at the border for several days now, and they're becoming desperate, and this feeling of despair is easily noticeable. But at the same time, there are so many that are going strong and are determined not to give up, to keep on fighting, to keep on going forward.
And what do you say to those guys that aren't able to come in?
I mean, we as activists or /volunteers, we're not advising them to give up and go back to Athens or their own countries, of course. But at the same time, we're not encouraging them to cross the border, because it's a difficult situation. When we go there, it's mostly to show solidarity and provide as much help as possible. We provide them with information on what the possible scenarios are if they decide to go back or if they decide to cross. Which, if they decide to cross, they would have to these so-called unprivileged nationalities, they would have to do it illegally, and that has some legal repercussions, of course. So we just provide them with information, and they're the ones who must take the final decision.
What's a typical day like for you, looking after these people, giving them information and food, I imagine? How long do you spend down there yourself on a typical day, and what do you do?
Every day is different. So I also have a paid job, so it's difficult to now. It's getting more and more difficult to be there day and night. But when you go there, it's impossible to say that you will only be there for 5 hours, because there's always something needed, and there's always someone needing something, and it's just difficult to leave that place. It's thousands of people per day. It's like around 5,000 people per day. It's just too many people, and too many. And too little infrastructure and proper conditions for all those people. And so what we normally do is, as I said, provide them with basic items such as food, water, clothes, and even more importantly, information as to how to proceed, what their rights are, and what to do if they wish to seek asylum in Macedonia in particular. So just information as to what certain dangers are in a certain country, especially in Macedonia, because the smugglers are now getting more and more active because of this illegalization of people. So we have a lot of people from these unprivileged nationalities resorting to smugglers yet again. When things are made illegal and when people are viewed as illegal migrants entering the country, there's always more space for crime.
So is that smuggling people? Do you mean smuggling people across the border?
Yeah. So the smugglers have become active again because, as I said, these people that are labeled as economic migrants that do not come from Syria, Iraq, or Afghanistan, like for example Moroccans, Pakistani people, the people from Somalia and Eritrea, they are resorting to smugglers more and more. Because they're not allowed to cross the country, and they're denied their right to seek asylum, basically, because according to the Geneva Convention and international law, each and every claim should be examined individually, and it should not be nationality based or connected. Well, basically, what we're doing right now, what is happening right now, is basically we're directly infringing the Geneva Convention.
It must be difficult to process 5,000 a day.
Yeah, well, that's why not all of them get processed. I mean, it's the Balkan states are not processing them. They are just given that the refugees do not wish to seek asylum in these Balkan states, and rightfully so, because, for example, Macedonia was designated as an unsafe country for refugees by the UNHCR. So the refugees do not wish to seek asylum in these Balkan countries, but wish to continue onwards to the EU. And so it's the EU that is supposed to process these asylum claims. The Balkan states are only registering all the refugees, which is feasible. It's not infeasible. Hence, according to some theories, to which I myself subscribe, it's not the Balkan states that have come up with this rule of nationality-based segregation, but it's basically something that is probably imposed by the EU. Although the Balkan states are blameworthy as well because they're implementing it, and then thousands of people are still waiting and despairing.
And why was Macedonia classed unsafe then, just out of interest?
Due to various reasons. It doesn't have a proper asylum-seeking system. Yeah, so the conditions are not very adequate for refugees. There have been several reports of brutality used against refugees and such like. So it has been designated as an unsafe country by the UNHCR.
Okay, and I read that you pretended to be a refugee at one point in the past to get an idea of how refugees are treated. What did you discover when you did that?
I did not plan it actually. It just happened because it was raining and I put on my scarf to cover myself from the rain. Since most of the refugees, the female refugees, are wearing scarves, not all of them. There are different types of refugees coming, atheists and Christians and from different religions, but still most of them have scarves. As it was raining and I wanted to cover myself, the police and everyone else just assumed that I was a refugee myself. But it really puts things into perspective. You get to see how people are treating you firsthand, because they wanted to go to a bank because they had no money left. So they were asking their father, I think it was their father, to send them some money to buy train tickets, and they didn't know where the bank was. So we went to the bank, and it was, as I said, it was raining, but the staff at the bank would not let us wait inside in the waiting room. They wanted us to wait outside, and then we went to a store, I remember, and then the shop attendant was quite impolite. She was following me, and at a certain point I asked her in Macedonian why was she acting like that, and she kindly apologized and said, sorry dear, I didn't know that you're one of ours, you're one of our people, which is quite a dreadful thing to say, because I don't know how you differentiate between our people and us and them, and what does that even mean?
Yeah, and so would you say the people of Gevgelija aren't so welcoming towards the refugees?
I mean, there are people who are welcoming, but at the same time, there are a lot of stereotypes against them, and I wouldn't say that people are evil as such intrinsically, but it's just that they just don't know these newcomers, and they're blocked by all sorts of fears and phobias, irrational fears, and if you don't know something or someone, then it creates fear, and fear might even be conducive to hatred. So this is understandable, up to a certain extent, but we should not stop there. We should try to overcome these fears by interacting more with the refugees, and some of the decisions that we have made, that our country has made, for example, transferring the camp far away from the camps, that is far away from the towns, are further fueling these fears, because the local population has zero interaction with the refugees, and they know nothing of them. They just see them in the media, and of course the media is often portraying them as terrorists coming to Europe to spread Islam and whatnot. For me, the crucial thing is more interaction, so that we overcome dispel these silly stereotypes.
Yeah, and do you think that's likely to happen, though? Do you think it's going to be possible for people to interact with them?
I think it's possible. I think it's possible because I've seen how people can change their opinion about things and about refugees as well. So I think it's possible, but we need to. It's still something that needs to be addressed, because at present it's just a couple of activists trying to address this. There isn't like a more organized effort to address this aspect of overcoming stereotypes. So we're trying to implement, for example, a pro-refugee campaign with the solidarity movement of the left in Macedonia to try to dispel some of these unjustified stereotypes. And some people do seem to be more open to finding out more and bridging these gaps.
What kind of ways would you say refugees are like the rest of us? I mean, in what ways are they similar to us?
It's a tricky question, because we cannot really talk about the average refugee or how the refugees are as a group, because it's such an incredible mixture of cultures. You have yes, the vast majority of them are indeed Syrians, for example, taking this Balkan route, but there are, as I said, Afghans and Pakistani people and people from Eritrea, Somalia, Congo. So I mean, it's a huge mixture of people that cannot be labeled as one group of refugees. So that's why I cannot really speak about them as one single group. But I mean, they're just people. They're people like us. They have needs. They're kind. They are normal human being. If you greet them and welcome them, they will respond by greeting you in return and warmly. So it's normal human beings that have had difficulties in their countries, and whether it's due to poverty, different types of conflicts.
And they're going through very hard times, and they've come, some of them come on very long journeys. Who do the refugees you meet blame for their situation? Do they blame their governments, or is there any kind of common sort of target of blame with the refugees?
Well, since most of the refugees that I have managed to talk to about these things, because since most of them are from Syria. So if you talk about Syria specifically, some blame the regime, many blame the regime actually, Assad regime in their country, and then there are some that are supportive of it, but from the ones that have come to Europe and that I've talked to, very small percentage that said they were supportive of Assad. And then there is also the ones that say that it's just global politics. It's not, of course, Bashar is to blame, but up to a certain extent now it's as well all of the other international powers that have come to the rescue of Syria and are meddling there. But there are different views, conflicting views sometimes.
Are there different views about the airstrikes that everyone's taking part in now? With the UK and Russia and
of course.
the US. Yeah. Are they supportive, or would you say there's more people against it?
I would say the ones that are more critical thinkers are against it, and I have heard a lot of people saying that they support it as well, and they were actually wanting the international community to get involved in a more military way, but I think that's a smaller percentage. Again, this is just my coming from my personal drawing on my personal experience. So the most people that I personally have spoken to were not supportive of violence. Of course, I mean, we don't know what the solution is, but violence is certainly not the solution. Violence only perpetuates violence.
Yeah, I mean, I saw a photo of you with the message "Stop wars, not people." I mean, it's quite a simple message, but I'd probably agree with you. But are you optimistic that these wars will be stopped, or do you think the situation could get worse and you'd have more people fleeing the country of Syria?
No, I'm not optimistic, to be honest, that the conflicts will end anytime soon. I mean, I'm more realistic in that sense, but for these wars to end, it's not just a decision of governments. Governments usually try to take advantage of other countries' resources, and hence wars are created, are caused. But as one of the primary reasons for wars, I would say resource extraction, including oil as well, of course. But that demand for oil comes from people, for example, or for other resources, whether it's tantalum in Congo for our smartphones, whether it's oil for our cars, it comes from ordinary people. And it's not just about sending a message to our governments to stop wars, it's about us, ordinary people, directly influencing the way governments are acting, and us people directly stopping to directly or indirectly contribute to the creation of more wars.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think it's not their problem, but you know, a lot of people do vote these governments in, and they and you know, these wars continue. Do you follow what's going on in the news with ISIS and the Paris attacks, and has it affected anything on the ground there since, you know, some of these attacks?
Of course. Well, it was following the Paris attacks. It was then basically at that point that right after the Paris attacks that this new nationality-based segregation was implemented, and this new fence at the Greek-Macedonian border was erected. So we have our own little fence now to be proud of, unfortunately. Supposedly to try to better coordinate the flow of people, but it's this new fence is directly connected to the Paris attacks, and the flow of people is being restricted more and more. More and more controls, more and more checks. Even Frontex is at the Greek-Macedonian border now, and they will start doing more controls and checks.
And they're the people that report on the situation, don't they? They sort of interrogate people, yeah?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're like a European agency that screen people and identify. So their role is better identification and registration, especially via the so-called hotspot procedures. But it's a very controversial agency, and I dread the thought of having them at the border.
And what would you say to people who say there are terrorist attacks going on, and they could use the refugee crisis as a way of getting people in? What would you say to people who say that?
I mean, it's if you're a terrorist, you really need to be a very, very stupid terrorist trying to get to Europe with refugees, taking that it's an extremely dangerous route, first of all, with all the expensive one, with all the smugglers and pirates on the sea and all the casualties that the sea has taken. And then, of course, you have all the screening procedures at each and every border in each and every country, sometimes even twice. So, for example, they need to leave fingerprints, and they need to be taken pictures of. They need to be registered in each and every country over and over again. So, I mean, you really need to be a very stupid terrorist if you are to do that. I mean, I haven't spoken to all of them, and I don't know them that well. So, yes, maybe there is a very small percentage, but even though I highly doubt it. But how can you equate the entire group of people, literally? How can you equate them to terrorists altogether? And if anyone has had any contact with the current refugee groups, they have probably noticed all the children and women coming. Are they terrorists as well? So it's very dangerous to generalize, put the whole group in one corner.
Yeah, and anyway, they probably got their own way of getting through the terrorists. I mean, one of the guys from ISIS who was apparently involved in the Paris attacks seemed to have no problem getting into Paris anyway.
But that still hasn't been proved. I mean, so a Syrian passport was found, but again, you need to be a very stupid terrorist to bring your passport at the crime scene.
Yeah, I know about that passport. Yeah, that did sound a bit strange. After the Paris attacks, there was a pianist playing John Lennon's Imagine on the streets. I think he goes around to various terrorist events and he plays John Lennon's Imagine. And the lyrics of the song are talk about no religions and no countries. I think I read somewhere that you think borders should be abolished as well. Is that correct? What do you think about that? Do you think it's time to kind of stop being so patriotic and maybe start getting rid of countries altogether? Is that the answer?
Borders should be abolished eventually. I am a bit of an anarchist in that regard, but I have some anarchist views. I don't know if I would call myself an anarchist in that sense, but in the sense that nationality and the very notion of nationhood is a social construct. It's not something natural. It's we connect with the people. I personally have zero connection, and I share nothing with the people who are erecting, with the Macedonians who are erecting Macedonian police that are erecting the current fence at the border. I share nothing with them. At the same time, I share a lot of ideals and a common struggle with many of the refugees that are whether from Syria or from Pakistan that are fighting for freedom of movement. Identity is important in many regards, but I feel like national identity is a completely ridiculous notion. So yes, we should work on dispelling the existence of such a thing as a national identity, or the necessity for it, more to the point. And then, only then, via awareness raising, come to a point where we actually realize that all people are one, and that the notion of nationality is a nonsensical notion, and hence a superfluous one. But so yes, abolishing borders and anarchy in the sense of hierarchy and and proper order without a government is indeed needed, and it is the ultimate goal. But we don't really know how to get there. I wouldn't say that we should abolish borders as of tomorrow by violent means. It's a process. It's a slow process, but I do believe that we should strive to get there.
Yeah, I agree with you on that point. To be honest, I don't feel any patriotism towards my country. I'm from the UK. I've got nothing against people in the UK. I also share the view that I don't really understand patriotism. It's like seems to me like sort of pretending to be part of a team, and there's so many people in countries that you don't all share the same personality anyway. I think
Exactly.
I associate more with Latin cultures than I do with the sort of British culture. And in fact, in England, we don't really have much of a culture anyway. I mean, most people who think of England just think of fish and chips, and that's about it, really. But what about cultural differences for the refugees going into other countries? I mean, some of them have different religions, different methods of justice, different values. Do you think that they will have any problems assimilating into new countries?
Difficulties, I would say yes, because it's different cultures. And even for myself, coming from the Balkans, from Macedonia specifically, when since I also have a job in Spain, and I go there every now and then. So when I go to Western Europe, it's challenging for me as well to grow accustomed to a new culture, even though we're talking about two European countries, let alone a European country versus a Middle Eastern country or an African country. So yes, it's completely different cultures. People might have difficulties, but at the same time, I don't think that they would start imposing the rules and on other people. As long as we respect the way they want to live their lives, and as long as the way they want to live their lives does not restrict us from living our lives, and vice versa, as long as our way of living our lives does not restrict them from freely expressing themselves, then it should not be that big of a problem. And we've seen it happening, and some of the most important things about history have occurred when different cultures when people from different cultures were interacting. To mention one, Renaissance.
Yeah, indeed, it is possible. If I know you've probably been asked this before, but if anyone wants to help the refugees, what's the best thing they can do?
I mean, if they want to be directly involved, of course they can. People can either go do field work in a certain country. In Macedonia, unfortunately, that's a bit more difficult because international volunteers are required to have an international volunteering visa, which is not impossible to obtain, but it's a slow it might take a month or two, but in countries such as Greece, since it's an EU country, or Slovenia, Croatia, volunteers are always welcomed, and but it's definitely necessary to coordinate with local volunteers, because they have been there for a longer time and they have more insight in how things should be done. So network with local NGOs or volunteers. That's in terms of field work. On the other hand, if people want to donate, I'm not saying that they shouldn't be donating, but that's not my message. If people want to donate, they will find people to donate to, or organizations to donate to. But my message is more of like if someone asks me how they can help, I would probably say ask them to try to work on more structural changes and more political activism rather than donating, because when we donate to a cause, we feel better about ourselves and we become a bit of a parasite, and we don't see the big picture, and we don't see the need to make more structural changes at a more structural level, whether it's lobbying and campaigning and whatever, protesting to change to reform the current asylum system, or campaigning for more refugees to be accepted, campaigning for safe passage for refugees, and especially trying to change our own needs and then the way we live our lives.
So people often say what goes around comes around, so if you do something bad, then you might find that there'll be a negative result for you later. But I hope it also works in the opposite way, but that if you do good and help other people, that you might find later you'll reap the rewards. I hope that's true for you anyway, Gabriella, and that you'll achieve your dreams once all this has come to an end anyway. And I just wanted to thank you for joining us today, and wish you all the best, and keep up the good work, basically.
Yeah, well, thank you, but I've already achieved my dream. It's fighting not for the people, but with them, fighting for freedom, fighting for social justice. So I would say I am living my dream, but thank you anyway.
Good. Yeah, thanks so much, and I hope maybe at some point in the future we can come and chat to you again if there's if there's any developments.
Definitely, no problem.
Thanks very much then, Gabriella. Thanks for listening to today's show. Remember, you can find us at www.truthsentinel.co.uk, and you can also leave a voicemail there, which we'll put in the next show. You can leave comments about things we've talked about to let us know your views. So please do that at www.truthsentinel.co.uk. And remember, you can also find us on YouTube. Thanks for listening, everyone. Goodbye.